Hello, my name is Ian Carter and welcome to the Warley Model Railway Club. I'd like to talk to you about a recent project done regarding the history of the steam locomotive. It's actually called the Great British Steam Locomotive from Cradle to the Grave, and it means exactly that. It's the whole history. Obviously we're looking now at where the history started, so I'd like to go through now exactly how we actually carried out each project.
Welcome to the Warley Model Railway Club virtual event, featuring club life, the exhibition and the exhibitors. We hope you enjoy this presentation.
This project came about when I had a modelling ambition to do a model of the Raynell trials. So I started doing the research in order to do a fairly accurate model. After getting totally engrossed in this history, I decided why not model the whole history. About the same time, at the Warley 2018 exhibition at the NEC, I spoke to Cliff Parsons of Gresley Beat fame and coordinator of AMREC, which is the Ashford International Model Railway Education Centre, a new venture in the form of a permanent exhibition for many quality model railways supported by some high profile and famous modellers. This venture came about when two young lads asked when looking at a layout, "What's that black stuff?" Obviously referring to coal. These lads had never seen coal before. With the ethos of AMREC is, could we educate through model railways? Initially I wanted to portray the technical development of the steam locomotive, but this would be very difficult to do with most developments hidden under the bonnet, so to speak. So with the ethos of AMREC, I decided to model the general influential developments and relevant engineers and who influenced who, including world events affecting the railways as well. Most of the research came from my own collection of books and models from the club library. The only trouble is that with the very early stuff, one book would contradict another, and the very early images were really only artist sketches or occasional portrait. Okay, so here we have the first section that's based around the 1600s. Obviously the history evolves around mines, mine workings, and a lot of the mines had problems with water ingress into the mine, so they needed somebody to pump the water out. So we have a pumping engine. Later on, when the static steam engine developed, they also had winding engines and then engines for inclined planes. At the same time, they used wagons and horses, single wagons and horses, to convey the coal and minerals down to the nearest port or river because the roads were so bad at the time. We also have a pack horse bridge here just to show what things were like in those days. The progression from them was to use multiple wagons with multiple horses. And then along came a man called Richard Trevithick, who invented the very first steam engine. And there we have it there with the cauldron wagons behind. I'd like to show you just briefly how I actually did these wagons. First of all, I used Will's 2mm planking with microstrip added, painted an oak collar, and then weathered to varying degrees to create variation. This was put on a square timber section subframe, which also created the dumb buffers. That was glued to that. In turn, Langley wheels were put together with axles, so the two were married together like that. And that's how the wagons were produced. The scenery themselves, that was used modern insulation material covered with ordinary plaster to create the rock effect. The track bed itself is foam board with a track direct straight onto it. That's actually angled plateway track. The buildings again use foam board base with plastic card added and then weathered to get a realistic effect. The timber on the winding engine. That was just probably old rocket sticks and any timber that was come to hand. The chutes were used using coffee stirrers with little strips of wood added onto that to make the chutes as well, and then a bit of engaged track for the track there. The same with the bridge at the back. That's based on the Causey arch. That was foam board covered in plastic hard and then weathered. The rear itself, that was sealed and then little stones added before we poured the varnish to give the rear effect. And if you can see there, you can see it's rather black coming away from the mine from where we got the water coming out the pump. Okay, this is section number 2. This is basically round about the start of the 1800s, so we're 100 years later from the very start. This cameo really is showing what life was really like before the railways, with these badly rutted roads. And the other thing was they didn't like using roads because of the toll charges. Here we have a model of a toll house. Actually, that's a Wills model. And it shows a junction of roads, one going up in the hills, one carrying on under the tunnel. The tunnel itself is based on the images of when locomotion ran up the first time on the S&D, the Stockton and Darlington Railway. That's a basic amard.com model with the wagons at the back. And the bridge itself, it's same again, it's foam board covered in plastic hard. As you see on the track in them days was on stone blocks. So again, I've emulated the stone blocks with little pieces of foam board with fine scale track on top of those. There's a little cameo there of what life was like with, as far as transport with horses. The model, I saw that based down at the Great Dorset Steam Fair, how they actually did that, so I modelled that as well. Okay, so this is Cameo 3, based on the Rainier trials. This date would be around about 1829. It's actually opened in 1830. So this is based on the Rainier trials, where everybody knows the rocket. Not many people know the other locos that took part. There was actually 10, but there was only 5 that was really in the contention. That one was Perseverance. Novelty was the crowd's favourite. Sans Pareil was another favourite, and then we have Cyclops, which is a bit tongue-in-cheek, but it was basically driven by a horse. And then at the very back we have Umbrian. These kits were from the Dapol range. Umbrian was kit bashed from a Dapol kit. The rest, because there's nothing else, anything like it, all had to be scratch built. Basically all bits from a bits box, and then basically plastic card framework and plastic card frames underneath for tanks and things like that. Whatever bits came available for the right part. This was basically strip plastic card, and then the track itself, or the whole track bed, is on foam board again with the track direct glued straight onto the track. The structures at the back for the retaining walls, steps and everything was built by another club member named Jim Smith. Again, the same principle, foam board shell with plastic card facing. This time we used actually paving slabs that we normally use on platforms, because this was the nearest thing to cut stone. The other problem was people. Very hard to get people of that era, so there was quite a few wedding scenarios used. The brides were painted a different colour rather than white, and it's very difficult to people with top hats of that era. So there was a lot of work involved in doing all the figures for these. There are a couple of Hampton cabs on top. A bit of modeller's license there. It was about 5 years too early for Hampton cabs, but I thought they looked the part. Okay, so we were on scenario 4 with the diorama of the navvies. Without the navvies, the railways wouldn't have happened. Right at the back, I've modelled the tunnel being constructed. Again, this is strip wood, foam board for the walls, and plastic card for the, I think I actually used a soil pipe cut in half to form the tunnel, and plastic card added both inside and on the outer edge to emulate the ring arches being made. This diorama is actually based on the tring cutting, and this is just a few 100 yards or 100 yards of miles and miles of track, and all this track was cut out by hand using just picks and shovels and wheelbarrows. The wheelbarrows inclines themselves, I didn't realise to study in the photo, but found out later that they actually built up the banks on the inclines to reduce the rake of the barrow walks. The barrow walks again were made out of coffee stirrers, strip wood added for the supports, and then Langley wheels for the pulleys. The interesting thing about this is I always thought the horses pulled the wagons directly away, but they pulled the barrows with a rope up to a top pulley, down to a bottom pulley, and pulled it along the bank so they could observe the barrow coming up the incline. Again, a lot of the figures took a lot of painting. When I'm painting figures, I always start with the flesh first, then the white shirts, and then whatever they're wearing on top, and then finish off with trousers and boots. I've also modelled the bricks in there, and on one of the research photos there was even foremen standing on rocks observing what's going on below. Okay, so now we're on diorama 5. This is based between the 1840s and 1890s. Still very much a rural scene, but the main era of this was they were big wheelers. They were all big wheelers. We have the Great Western's first ever loco ever built, North Star. We have a Caledonia Railway, big wheeler at the top there. A Great Northern Railway, big wheeler of this side. And I had to include this loco because this was George Stephenson's long boilered loco, which was way ahead of its time, I think. When you look at it, it was an 060 in 1842, and really 060s didn't come around till the turn of the next century. Okay, so this is based on a basic model. Obviously everything was weathered, somewhat more realistic, with real coal added. The two locos at the back are based on AIMA.com static locos, again altered. This one very much altered with the cab cut down, other bits added to make it more realistic, and the front buffer beam, which is generic to that particular loco. The other thing with this era is a lot of the ballast was probably ash rather than the ballast we know today, because there was loads of ash from all these mine workings, from the mine engines, so that's what they used in that particular period. And this really just creates the type of scene that was at that particular period. Okay, so here we have Diorama 6. This is based really from 1890s to the turn of the century, and where the locos here were predominantly 440s. 440s being two sets of drive wheels coupled together to give more power. Again, a lot of the locos here are AIMA.com static locos, again weathered with real coal added. There is one Great Western loco there was a kit model, and again real coal added to the back of that. Both engine sheds are proprietary engine sheds, again as you can see well weathered to look more realistic. The other thing I note here is the ballast has now changed to more darker ballast, more akin to what we're familiar with today. Again, the whole track bed is on a foam board with the track directly glued to that, and the scenery the same as we've said before. Okay, so now we're on Diorama 7. This is the period just after grouping, where all the companies were grouped into 4 major groups, being the Great Western, the Southern, the LMS and the LNER. This period was probably the period of speed more than anything, so that's why I've included all the 4 streamliners of each company. The models themselves, again, aimer.com. That was the hardest model to do. With all the basic model, we added the streamlining both on the buffer beam, the front end and the sides. Obviously this was an era of speed. We have the Coronation there, which had the world record in 37 of 114 miles an hour, and of course Mallard, the world record, beat at 126, which still holds today for any steam locomotive. On the back we have several other locos with a depot, just to emulate what things were like at that period. And again, the ballast has changed to a more recognisable ballast that we know today, of the grey ballast. And the other thing I've modelled here is the cesses. Not many people model cesses, but obviously all railways needed drainage to get rid of the water. If they didn't have drainage, the banks would collapse. Okay, so here we have a post-war era of nationalisation, when British Railways took over the railways themselves after the war. We have a typical BR depot with standard locos being serviced, which were running at the time, together with other locos of the past but are ready for scrappage. BR actually inherited 20,000 locos to be scrapped in favour of the BR standards. 1 or 2 locos were kept back for preservation. As we can see, 1 loco there, that's ready for preservation there. There's also, if you can see right down the front, there was 1 guy recording the proceedings before everything is lost. If we look over to the other side, we can actually see the scrap pile, which probably brings a tear to many eyes. There's also a scrap loco being cut up. I've used modelled brass tube with a bespoke tube plate made out of plastic card, with holes drilled in it. The tubes pushed in place to show what it's like inside. Also, when they took these copper tubes off, that was obviously worth a lot of money, so they kept them to one side as a tube rack there. All the bits on the back are obviously bits of locos cut up. To form the pile, I actually stuck them all to a foam board base. So we can see lots of anatomy of locos there. This is all based on a scrapyard in South Wales, and this is the picture I used for that cameo. As you can see, there's information boards on the front attached to each cameo explaining that particular period. Everything is in date order, what happened when, who influenced who, and some of you may have already seen the whole exhibit at the 2019 Warley show. It was programmed to be in the 2020 show, but unfortunately, for obvious reasons, that's not going to happen. It is programmed to be in the Warley Model Railway show on the 27th and 28th of November in 2021, and it's also programmed to be a permanent exhibition at AMREC in Ashford when that opens in the future. Maybe one day we will continue the story with modern traction, with diesel and electric, up to the present day.
Thank you for watching this Warley virtual event presentation. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe. We hope to see you when we are back at the NEC on the 27th and 28th of November 2021.